Oftentimes, when people think about knitters or crocheters, they imagine a person sitting in their favorite chair at home and quietly knitting or crocheting. But there are people who take their fiber arts with them on the most wild adventures. They consider themselves nomadic crafters. And I interviewed two people like this. One was Israeli designer Nama Aidu, and you can see her interview in episode 67. And the other one is a fellow YouTuber, the host of The Shawl Knitter, Sitala Gross, who originally is from South Africa. And you can see her interview in episode 106. So today I want to introduce you to another nomadic crafter. She comes originally from Germany. Please meet Rica Kramer. Hi, my name is Irina. I'm the host here, and my guest today is Rica Kramer from Germany originally. Where are you now?
In India.
Well, I mean, every time I look at your Instagram, you're in another place, and I see all different kinds of fiber arts on your Instagram. Let's talk about that journey, how you became a knitting and crocheting nomad.
Okay, I think I was a nomad before I started knitting and crocheting. Since I remember, I love to travel.
Yeah.
When I was young, I only traveled inside Europe because I couldn't afford going somewhere else. But then during university, I left backpacking and I never stopped.
Well, how
And
does it work now? So, at some point, you were diagnosed with the CFSME, and it's pretty debilitating. I mean, it's like you can't leave the bed, basically. You always feel very tired. What was,
exactly.
how did knitting come into your life at that point?
So I needed a new hobby that I can do laying down because sometimes for weeks I couldn't leave the house and you don't just want to watch a screen somewhere. So I needed a new hobby that I didn't have before that you can do laying down. So that's how I started knitting.
But at that time, like when I'm looking at your knitting now, you have some very complicated pieces. At that time, you told me you wanted to knit just something simple, like mindless, just to keep your hands busy, basically.
Yeah, and obviously I didn't have the experience that I have now. In the beginning, I think we all start with knit stitches and pearls.
So how did you learn? Like, was it from YouTube? Like, what was your learning style?
No, actually, I had a friend. She's born in Kazakhstan, and her grandma is Kazakhstan, and her grandma wanted to teach her, but she didn't want to learn alone. So she invited me, and I kept the knitting, and she didn't.
It's so funny. Well, tell me about your travels because you mentioned in Kazakhstan, but you also mentioned to me that you learned how to felt and build yurts in Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, so when I travel, I like to look for traditional crafts in the area, whatever that is.
Yeah,
Um, Fiber related crafts are even more interesting, but I'm also interested in like stuff like wood carving, pottery, whatever there is like traditionally. And a country like Kyrgyzstan, that is still a half nomadic country, obviously has a lot of things to offer.
right.
So I don't know if you've ever been to Kyrgyzstan, but the nomad people still live in this traditional yurt tents.
Right.
And maybe you don't know, but most of the stands are made out of wool because it keeps the warmth in. So there's different layers of wool that they use, like the really coarse, not so fine wool, the ones that we wouldn't want to wear on our body.
Right.
That stuff is used for the outside of the yurt to keep the rain away
Yeah,
from
and
the inside.
it's
But
interesting
inside
that wool is basically have this water repellent quality to it, right?
exactly. And inside they have beautiful decorations that are made out of wool. For example, they have this big like a carpet that they call sherdak. So it's like pieces of felted wool that they sew together in traditional patterns, for example.
Right. And
But also all the details, all the like little strings that they use are all embroidered. Everything is decorated there.
how do you deal with languages traveling from place to place like this?
Okay, I speak English and Spanish. Like my Spanish is way worse than my English and my German, but enough to like get around in Spanish speaking countries. I've learned some Russian in school because I'm from East Germany. So even if the wall was down when I came to the higher school levels, there was still this tendency to teach Russian in school instead of French.
Right.
So, like, I can order food and ask for directions in Russian, but usually you find someone that speaks English. Like in this yurt camp, I was going with a nice Russian lady that was translating for me. So there's always an option. And in the worst case, you can just do with your hand and feet communicating. Like you can watch someone do their crafts without fully understanding them in the language. Like craft is their own language, I think.
Yeah, it's so true because like when you see somebody doing something, it's immediate connection. Like if you want to learn, right, you don't need to know every word. You can just repeat the actions that they do and it's becoming a language of its own.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how all these crafts kind of connect the world. Like wherever you go, like I haven't found a country where there is no traditional craft, and nearly everywhere is a fiber craft. And when you just go traveling and to make friends, you sit in the park knitting. There will always be an old lady coming up or an old man that is, oh, my wife is knitting as well. Do you want to come over for tea? So it's like really easy to connect with this.
Do you see any parallels like when you go from different places? Like, is there ever like unexpected experience that you think like this is unique to this specific country? And then you go someplace like across the world and you see the same similar techniques or similar fiber crafts?
Yes, but it's like even more in foods than in the crafts, where there is a surprise because when you look at the history, for example, I live in the Tibetan exile community. So historically, they were nomads like Kyrgyzstan, and I'm sure you've heard about the Silk Route.
Right.
So all these crafts have traveled from the one part of the world to the other. So it's not really a surprise that you find like similar patterns.
Yeah.
And there's also that, like with colonization, the British brought a lot of their techniques. Um, no, I don't have any at hand, but there's, for example, a special kind of like how they knit the socks here, and you clearly see how it was influenced from the British area.
Well, what brought you to India and what made you feel like it's your home there?
I first came to India 8 years ago, mainly for Ayurvedic treatment. Like, have you heard about Ayurveda? I'm not sure if everyone has. It's like a traditional Indian medicine.
No, I haven't like
And so Western medicine didn't help me at all. They said you just have to live with this for the rest of your life, and I'm not a person that just accepts this. So I explored the world for traditional medicine, and Ayurveda is really amazing. I would recommend it to like everyone that has a chronic disease and cannot get help in the West. So my main purpose back then was like doing a so-called panchakarma. It's like a detox tour. So it's like really intense. But also Ayurveda starts with like small things like changing your diets and medicaments. But depending on how serious your disease is, it makes sense to detox your body. Because even if you live pretty healthy, there's so many things in the air nowadays, in the foods that we cannot avoid, that we all have some kind of toxins. And when we're really healthy, our system doesn't care so much. But if we have something already, then our system is easy to go out of balance. And actually, Ayurveda helped me a lot. It reduced my amount from like 16 to 20 hours of sleep to 10 hours of sleep a day. So it gave me a lot of life quality back.
Right.
But also, India has a lot of like interesting spirituality. And I was drawn to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Buddhist tradition. And I came here to see the place, and even if the Dalai Lama wasn't there back then, I fell in love with the people and the whole culture. And yeah, I came back and I came back, and now I live here.
Well, I mean, to me, it's mind-blowing that you were able to improve your health so drastically that you like actively traveling. It's not just that you feeling a little bit better, you like climbing mountains and you're doing some like you're very active.
Okay, that only looks like I'm super active. Like, honestly, whenever I can, I take the public transport instead of walking things. Like, I learned how to balance my energy. Like, I still have really low energy, but I've learned how to balance it, how much I have. And I know, for example, if I do something today, I need 3 days of rest afterward where I don't do anything and might not even be able to leave the bed. So you always have to balance it. But I think it's still better than not doing anything. And even when I was like even more sick than I was now, it was still more interesting to stare at the room that you don't know than staring at your own room at home,
Is there a place,
because you still meet people.
right? Is there a place that you haven't been yet that you dream about going to?
Oh, there's a lot of places because the world is big. But for example, Mongolia is really interesting. Like, I really like traditional cultures, and there Mongolia is really nice. And I also love deserts, and they have yachts. So
Right.
all the good things. Obviously, I would like to go to Tibet, but that's not really possible from the political side. I also really want to go to Ethiopia. So that is high on the list. But there's over time, it's not getting less countries you want to visit, because there's countries you really love and want to go back to. And there's new countries that you want to explore. So I don't think this will ever end.
Well, when you think about different country to visit, how do you research? Like, what attracts you? Is it about nature? Is it about culture? Is it about food? Is it about fiber arts? Like, what are you actually looking for in a new place?
Okay, it sounds like there's a real plan behind it. It's not. It's often like, oh, there's a cheap flight to this country. Let's just go and see what's there. Because there's something interesting in every country. Only often when I've decided for a place, then I look for the places like what might be the traditional craft, or like I go to the first city and ask people, and then they send you somewhere. They say, oh, in this area, this people live, and they do this kind of thing. So there's no like real planning. It's often like, oh, there's a cheap flight, or I know a person from a different trip and they invited me to visit them. And then I go to this country. Like my last trip, like every 3 months, I have to leave for the visa. And the last time I went to Israel because I met so many Israeli people here.
Yeah.
So that's like easy. You have a couch where you can stay on, and then you go and visit.
Well, let's talk about financial side of it. You mentioned that like when you were a student, you were backpacking through Europe because you didn't have money to travel far. How do you manage it now?
Oh, it's the same. I still don't have money and I still backpack, but over time, traveling got much easier. So nowadays, there's like all these cheap airlines. There's like now it became trendy that people, when they finish school, go backpacking. So there's way more hostels. There's things like Google Maps that can help you to orientate in a new place. You can find out accommodation over like websites, like all this. Like when I started backpacking, there was no smartphone. So it was the old days where you had to navigate with a map and you had to like ask people, oh, is there a hotel around or use the Lonely Planet or whatever. So actually traveling became easier and cheaper over time. So now it's possible to go further away.
Tell me what's in your backpack. You mentioned to me that like you brought the whole suitcase of yarn from Peru, like, but what's like your essential? What do you take with you everywhere?
Okay, I usually travel with hand luggage only. There might be exceptions, but normally it's only hand luggage. It's like 10 kilogram. So obviously my camera goes with me. I have a DSLR. I'm still old school. I'm still staying with the old system. Then some clothes, but to be realistic, I usually have more wool than clothes in my backpack because especially like I often don't have a return ticket home. So I don't know how long I go. And in a lot of countries, you know already you don't get the quality of yarn you like. Like, for example, here where I live, there is a yarn shop down in town, but it's only 100% acrylic yarns. There are no labels on the wool. There's no information how much meters you have on a skein, no like advice on which knitting needles or gauge. All this doesn't exist. It's just a big bulk of yarn. They might weigh it for you. They tell you the price per kilogram,
Right.
but not per skein. And then you go for it. And that's like, that works for some projects, but
Well,
I
tell
think
me
over
tell me
time,
about your preference. Like when it comes to yarn, how do you decide what to invest in, where to buy it? Like tell me how that goes.
oh, that depends on the case. Like, depending on what kind of project you want to make, you choose your yarn. I think that's what we all do wherever we do it. But because I'm traveling, I choose a lot of lightweight yarn. So I have a lace project right now, and it goes really, really slow because it's a lace project, but it doesn't take up so much space in your backpack.
Right.
But then I go to try and find like traditional local yarns in the region. So recently I was in Rajasthan and there's a camel research center. And just for fun, I asked in the shop if they have some camel wool. And the guy said, yes, not here. I have some at home, and invited me to meet his family. And I came back with a big bag of camel wool. Like it's not a really soft yarn, it's more rough yarn,
Mhm.
but it's still really lovely. And he also had some sheep wool. And then he invited me to meet his friend that is like working on the handloom. So they are making like towels and shawls. And for example, this kind of blanket is a mix of camel wool and sheep wool. Like in India, shawls are a big thing, from silk shawls to wool shawls, cashmere. Like you find everything here that you can dream of. So there's a lot of like traditional weaving. So he showed me his weaver friend and he said, oh, I have some friends that are also knitting. So I visited his knitting friends, and this woman was like, oh, I have this bag of sheep wool that lives in the Thar Desert. Do you want it? So I bought the sheep wool from her. So a lot of things go by accident. And then
How
I
much
find a project for the wool I get. That's obviously not I have a project and buy the wool. I get the special wool and then I look for a project.
how much of your wardrobe is handmade?
Actually, not much. because I give like 90% of what I need to other people because I don't have space in my backpack when I'm traveling to keep the items. Now, finally, I have like an apartment here in India where I can store some things. But like usually when I'm on the road, there's no space. Like a lot of knitwear takes lots of space and is also kind of heavy.
Right.
So it's not the most practical thing for backpacking.
I mean,
So I make a lot of things.
living in India, like it's a hot climate. Do people wear their knits there? Do you get to wear your knits there?
Oh, I live in the Himalayas on 1,700 meters.
Right.
Yes.
Colder. Yeah.
So like even India is not always hot and not hot everywhere. And because there is no heating system and the houses are built in ways that they're not really isolated. Often here you can't even close the window or the doors properly. It's always like in winter it gets cold inside. Even if it's like really warm and sunny outside, inside it's getting cold enough to wear knitwear.
Well, you besides knitting, right? You crochet a lot. How do you decide on like what kind of fiber arts is going to happen on any particular day?
Oh, just by mood, or I have a project. Like yesterday, I was in my Buddhist teachings, and it's a new project. And they were talking that they right now don't have any source of income to like keep this project alive. And we were thinking about a donation box. And then we were joking, and now I'm knitting a donation box.
Do you design most of your own patterns or do you work on other people patterns?
I do both, depending on my mood. If I like there's so many amazing designers that I love to follow, but sometimes it's also something like I'm in a retreat for 10 days and I don't have any more patterns with me, and then I just have to come up with something myself. But let's say it's easier for me to design my own stuff in crochet than it is in knitting because I have the feeling I did more of it in crochet. While like I can do knitting as well, it's easier in crochet. So I have like made whole garments up in crochet, like dresses and everything. Like somehow it seems easier for me, and I cannot even tell you why.
Well, tell me how you learn crochet.
Oh, this was on a trip to Canada. And because it's Canada and the US and Canada are a bit weird with like weapons, I was not allowed to bring knitting needles on the airplane. So I didn't, and I thought I'm just there for like 2 weeks. I can live without knitting. But it turned out I had a lot of downtime because the people I was traveling with were kind of slow. They needed like 3 hours in the morning to get ready. And I'm like much more quick. So I had like 2.5 hours in the morning where I had nothing to do. And so I went to a shop and saw a crochet hook and a little booklet that is like how to crochet. And I just bought the hook, one skein of yarn, and the booklet and tried to learn it. And the booklet was really, really bad, but I was still motivated and then looked it up on YouTube. And then I just learned crochet out of necessity because I couldn't bring my knitting.
When you go to different places, like different people use different techniques for both knitting and crochet, do you learn new
Mm-hmm.
techniques as well?
Yes and no. Like I'm still knitting continental. Like I never had the urge to change this, but there's like different patterns and different stitches that I learn, but not completely new techniques. Because actually, knitting is a craft that I encounter least frequently because it's usually in a lot of countries it's a bit forgotten. Like I know in the US and in Europe it's really trendy right now. But in a lot of countries I go, they say, oh, yes, that's what my grandma did, or we had to do it. Now we don't want to do it anymore. But for example, in a lot of hot countries, people crochet now to sell like bikinis to tourists on the beaches and stuff. So crochet is like in the travel community, like all this, like I'm sure you've seen all the cute little crochet tops and stuff. That's something that locals make because it's quick and they can sell it on the streets.
Do you sell anything you make?
No, I'm just making for fun and as gifts. And sometimes I make something and someone says, "Oh, this looks nice." And then when it's finished, I gift it to this person.
Have
I
you
often don't even have someone in mind when I start a project. I just want to knit this item because it looks fun or I have the wool for it. And then I gift it to whoever says he likes it.
well, do you feel like you are influenced by the place you are in when you pick the next project?
Sometimes, but sometimes not. Like, yes, like sometimes you are at a beautiful place. Like last year in Mexico, I was at this beautiful waterfall and I was looking like there was jungle around the waterfall. And I had this Japanese lace knitting book and I was just looking at patterns that could look like a waterfall. So I made something up out of this. But it's not all the time. Like I still have a big list of things that I want to knit. But also like, for example, here I realize I'm influenced by the climate here because layering is really important here. We easily have like 10 degrees difference every day, but sometimes between the top of the mountain and down in town, it's sometimes 20 degrees difference.
Right.
So I'm now on to knitting cardigans instead of sweaters because it's easier to like layer them.
Is there like some technique that you thought would be like way too difficult, but then you did it and it's not that bad?
Not really. Maybe I haven't encountered it, but it's like usually just getting used to it. But I'm like,
Are you fierce like in everything you do? Because to me, like traveling by yourself in completely unknown places with like where you don't even know if you'll find the common language, it's pretty fierce, right? It's pretty open-minded and like brave. Do you feel like you approach all the crafts the same way? That like what can possibly go wrong kind of thing?
let's be realistic with knitting and crochet. What can go wrong is that I have to rip it out again, but that's the worst that could happen. So what do I have to lose? And even if like I might lose a skein of yarn, that's really not the end of the world. And when you know a little bit about Buddhism, it works even better because you don't waste your time thinking about the things anymore because life is impermanent. There's change all the time. And we waste way too much time overthinking things instead of doing them.
Is there
So
ever
no,
a day when you don't craft?
yeah, but not many. But sometimes you're too busy, or when I have like, I still have phases where I'm like sick for a week and I can't really leave the bed. And when it's too bad, I'm not crafting, but like, let's say 98% of my days I craft, and there might be one day every 2 months where I don't.
Well, you mentioned the alternative medicine for your disease. What role does crafting play in your health, in your life quality?
That's a good question. I wouldn't connect it directly to my bodily disease, but I'm sure it's like helping every knitter and crocheter with their mental stuff. Like it's more like in emotional situations when you get upset, then it can like make you calm. Like for me, it's a patience thing. Like it helps me with patience because as you can imagine, not everything goes by time. Like in our countries, everything is unplanned here. Um, I'm German. We are really punctual. Everything is like well organized. And then you go to a country where you wait 8 hours for your bus to arrive. What keeps me sane is that I just sit down, get out a ball of yarn and a crochet hook or knitting needle and just use the time. Because often there's like on traveling, there's times that seems like wasted. But with crafting, you can use the time. Like in India, when someone says it's 6 hours, I always calculate 8 hours at least. Yeah, it's always longer than people say. The bus might come late, then there's a accident. Like you never know. Everything takes longer here. So I always have my knitting. Or if I meet people in some countries, people don't understand the idea of time. So you're sitting there at lunchtime and the person just comes an hour later. So you just get out your knitting. So it's like amazing for patience. And a lot of people tell me I don't have the patience for knitting. I'm like, no, that's what you need knitting for. Because it's really helping in the time that is like on the way, like to work or like in buses, public transport. Like, I think it's the best thing you can do with your time to feel the time is not wasted. And it's more healthy than staring at your phone the whole day.
Well, you mentioned your camera. Do you have like any desire or ambition to like write a book about your travels or to write a book about your fiber arts exploration in different places, share your travels like that way with the world?
I never thought about it seriously. I have a friend that is writing books, and she asked me to help her with something maybe in the future for her next book, but first she has to publish her book now. Like, I'm doing all the things for fun. I'm not into like earning money with anything or whatever. I'm just doing the things as I go. So I've not really thought about it. Like, I'm sharing the things. I have written a blog for like a long time, but only in German because it was mainly for my mom in the beginning and she doesn't speak any English. And this blog got a crafting section later, but it's like really small. And now I don't do it anymore.
How does your family react to the fact that they don't know where you're going to be the next day?
Oh, they usually know. Like, I think my mom just got used to it in the beginning when I was younger. She was not like a big fan of it. My dad cannot say anything because he was the same before he got married and got children. Just like back then, it was like East Germany. He couldn't travel as far as I could now.
Right.
But if he would have had the choice, he would have done the exact same thing. And yeah, my mom just got used to it because she thinks like if it makes you happy, then do it.
Well, do you feel like you're living your dream?
Yes, for sure.
What's the hardest thing of like not having a permanent place to live?
I think the hardest thing is that often your friends change quickly because you meet so many people, but they often only stay for 3 days. Like even now, when I'm settled here and I'm here for a longer time, a lot of people you meet just stay here for a maximum of a week. So you meet really nice people that you really like, and then they're gone in an instant.
What's
And
so
it's hard to stay in contact over distance. Like even if nowadays we have a lot of like technical possibilities to do it,
right?
it's still not so easy.
What is social media for you? Like, what do you get out of it?
Like as you have seen, my Instagram is only for knitting and crochet. There's not much about my like, yes, traveling is part of my life, but it's not like that I show all my travel pictures or something. For me, it's more like finding designers, looking at pieces, but also like I want to share what I knit so people can see how it looks on different body sizes and stuff. So that's what I mainly use it for. I'm not big into social media. I'm not using, like, I have a Facebook from like back then. I maybe look at it once a month.
Right.
I use like WhatsApp and Telegram to like keep in touch with people, but that's more or less it. I have never used TikTok or all these like fancy new things.
Yeah. Do you meet a lot of people like yourself on the road? Like, are there more nomadic knitters out there?
Um, I meet them, but really, really seldomly. And if they often say, "Oh, I have knitted before, but I never thought about bringing it for traveling." So it's like, let's say, one every 6 months. But here where I live, there's a lot of Tibetan women that knits the whole day on the street. Like they have like shops.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're waiting for customers, they sit and knit like little scarves or hats or stuff to sell also in their shops. So there's always knitting people around me here, but in other parts of the world, it's not so much. It's more like the locals than other travelers that you meet.
Well, is there like another fiber art that you is still on your list of things to learn?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things. So I'm getting a Indian spinning wheel, a so-called charka, that is somewhere in the post in India right now.
Have you
So you never know how long things take here, but I hope I get it latestly by next week. I just learned cross stitch in Palestine, so I haven't spent so much time with it. So I plan to like explore it more, but there's only a limited amount of hours in a day, and as much as I love to explore new hobbies, I don't want to like really go into something really deeply because knitting and crochet is like a full-time job already, if you know what I mean.
right? Well, how many hours per day would you say, like on average, do you knit or crochet or craft?
Okay, something like an average day doesn't exist in my life. Usually in the morning, I don't even know what happens in this day. So it's really hard to answer this. Um, I'm really lucky that here for my Buddhist teachings, my teachers agreed to me knitting during the teachings because it actually makes me more concentrated. Like, I don't know about you and other people, but often when you just listen to a teaching for like 2 hours, your mind might go off.
Right.
But as long as I have knitting or crochet while listening, I stay way more focused on what the person says. So that's like usually 2 hours that I knit every day. And then depending on the day, like sometimes I knit like 8 hours. Other days I'm really busy and only craft half an hour. So there is no real average.
Right. What about difficulty level of the projects that you choose? Like, do you go for the most difficult thing? Do you go for like some new skills, new designs, new ideas? Or is it balanced between like mindless knitting and something more complicated?
I actually have the problem that I choose too complicated projects and cannot bring them anywhere. So I now started like a mindless project just for the teachings I go to, because there I don't have the focus to work on color work or lace or cables. But for me, like just stockinette gets boring really easily. So I love the more interesting projects. So there's lots of like brioche and lace and cables and color work projects on my list, but not so much like just stockinette. So I just had to like come up with something that is like boring enough to take it with me to something like a teaching. So I can like use it to focus on listening, but it's not distracting.
Do you ever teach other people how to knit or crochet?
Yes, on my travels, if someone is interested, I always say like, yeah, let's sit down together. But it's often children that I teach in the end.
Have you ever
But
found somebody who you couldn't teach, or you think anybody can do it?
no, I actually teach the girls that only had one hand. And I teach her crochet because she loved the idea and she was like, I don't know, 10, 11 years old. And she was like, I want to learn it. And we made it possible. So instead of like holding the crochet, we were using the hammock and fixed the crochet project in the hammock so she could always go along
Oh, that's interesting.
with her one hand she had, and she didn't need to hold it with another hand. So like I think it's more about the motivation if you really want to learn it, and a bit of patience, obviously. Like some people just want to learn a complete skill in 5 minutes, and that doesn't work for anything in life.
Right.
But
Well, this-
usually when I teach someone, I teach like a easy project, like a headband, so they have a quick result
right.
and something that they can wear and can be proud of.
Your life is so colorful. Like you visit all these exotic places. What's your relationship with colors when it comes to your crafts?
I'm the most boring person you can imagine. I love all the earth tones, grays, beige, browns, maybe a dark green. Like in Germany, I have a favorite yarn shop, and she's always joking about that I'm the only person that never buys a color in her shop. Like I use colors for other people. So when someone's interested in something, like I would use whatever, but I would never pick something like pink or purple for myself. So that's like something like crazy if I have a color like this in my projects.
Well, I know you said you don't plan anything, but like, are there any plans, knitting or traveling for the nearest future for you?
Yeah, I have to go on a visa one again in April. So I will visit my family in Germany and then visit a friend in Portugal. Um, yeah, and then I come back here and enjoy my life here. And for knitting, there's lots of plans. My library at Ravelry is really long, but let's see what's realistic.
Well, I'm so
Yeah,
happy that you let me into your life a little bit for a glimpse. And I'm really happy that we got introduced and you agreed to be a guest of my channel today.
thank you.
Thanks so much, Rika.